living longer, living healthier, living better than ever before. Welcome to Mountain Pacific's Healthy Living for Life, a weekly series that gives you the information, education, and expert insight you need to become an active participant in today's ever-changing healthcare climate. Here now is today's program host.
Stress can come from a variety of sources: our daily life, a big life change, or living through a traumatic event like the pandemic or a natural disaster. Welcome to Healthy Living for Life, a show dedicated to helping you do just that. I'm your host, Colleen Roylance. Today we'll take a look at stress, ways to identify it, the consequences of it, and the toll it can take on your body. Stay with us, we'll be right back. Welcome back to Healthy Living for Life. Today we're joined by Dr. Doug Kunzweiler, who's the Medical Director for Mountain Pacific Quality Health. Dr. Kunzweiler, thanks for being with us.
It's good to be here, thank you.
Let's talk a little bit about stress. Let's start with What is stress?
Well, so I'm going to take you back to prehistoric times. Back when there were cave bears trying to eat people, our adrenal glands responded by making some hormones, chiefly adrenaline and cortisol, and those hormones had the effect of revving us up so that we could either fight the cave bear or, probably smarter, run away. So adrenaline raises our heart rate, it raises our blood pressure, and the cortisol provides sugar for our muscles to either run away or fight. So a stress is any sort of a threat to us, or anything that puts us on edge, anything that confronts us. Unfortunately, our adrenal glands aren't very smart, and they can't tell the difference between a cave bear or a high grocery bill or a kid flunking out of college. So our bodies respond in the same way to any sort of threat or any sort of a challenge, anything that is sort of thwarting us. So that's what stress is.
So we've transitioned from the bears that are going to eat us to the grocery bills, the inflation, and all of life's daily problems.
Yeah, pretty much we respond the same way.
So are there different kinds of stress? I would think when a bear is going to eat you, that's kind of a one-time event, right. And then there's this other stress that lingers.
Right, and when people do surveys to see what is stressing people out, there are a number of things that always sort of rise to the top. Finances are always up there very high. Stress from work, either being overworked or work that's boring, bosses who give you a hard time, and then interpersonal relationships, problems with spouses, with family, aging parents.
And having to deal with it all at one time.
Yeah, so those are the sorts of stresses that people experience most now, and there are still physical stresses, of course, as well, but our bodies respond the same way to psychic stress.
So how does it change our behavior when we're feeling stress? How does that manifest?
It depends a little bit on the person, obviously, but depression, anxiety, those are common responses. Some people just get fatigued, they get apathetic, they feel like they're overwhelmed and they just don't want to do anything. It does depend on the person somewhat, but those are common reactions that we see.
So you mentioned anxiety. What's the difference between stress and anxiety? Does one lead to another?
Yeah, I think in my mind, the stress, as I said, is some sort of a threat or something that is confronting us or interfering with what we want to do. And this reaction to the stress can be anxiety. And anxiety really is just worry. It's something you keep working over in your brain. You can't let go of it. And
so then
worry.
There's also burnout that we hear about. How does burnout fit into the stress anxiety spectrum?
Yeah, when people talk about burnout, usually what they are referring to is either boredom or being overwhelmed. And it is the stress, whatever the source of the stress is, leads to that burnout over time. And what we see is that people's job performance starts to fall off. They may get depressed, they may get sad, they may get apathetic, and ultimately usually leads to them leaving that job, doing something different.
Yeah. So going back to the cave bear, that's kind of a good stress. It saves your life. In modern day, is there a normal level of stress? I mean, is stress still good sometimes?
Well, I think some good things do come from it. It can be a motivator to help you, get up in the morning and go to work and do a good job, or it can be a motivator to help you change your life situation, improve your life situation. But when it's chronic, most of its effects, I think, probably tend to be negative.
So when should I go seek help? How do I know when I need to seek help, when it's too much, it's not normal?
Yeah, I think when you're not enjoying life, when you're not having any fun, something's wrong, and that's the time to look for help. I mean, we all have stress, and as we grow up, most of us learn how to deal with it, or we find ways to cope. But if you find that it's getting the better of you and you're just not having any fun anymore, then it's time to look for help.
You need to change something in your life,
right,
make it different.
Right.
So as an emergency room doctor for many, many years, did you see...
We don't want to talk about that.
We won't go into how many decades that happened. Did you see a lot of people that would come in because they just were so overwhelmed they couldn't manage?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. A lot of people would have anxiety attacks or panic attacks, and that's always caused by a stressor of one kind or another. And a lot of times people couldn't even identify exactly what the stressor was, but they would feel threatened, they would have a rapid heart rate, they would feel like they were short of breath, they would feel panicky, and it would just really sort of cripple them. It's a very, very bad thing to have.
Yeah. And so in an instance like that, there must be some ways that you can center yourself or calm yourself down to some degree?
Well, in the emergency room, of course, we use drugs.
Well, that's always a good step.
We would use medication if somebody got to that level, but that's only a temporary fix. And medication is really not a great answer. Most of the medicines that are used for panic attacks or for acute anxiety attacks like that have the potential for addiction. So we consider that just to be a short-term treatment. And we would generally try to steer people more towards counseling, psychology, cognitive behavioral therapy, those kinds of things if it got to that level.
Yeah.
But there are lots of strategies that people can employ before they get to that level.
Well, when we come back, we need to take a short break, but when we come back, let's talk a little bit about some of those strategies. So don't go away, stay with us. We'll be right back and talk about how we can deal with stress. Welcome back. Dr. Kunzweiler is still with us, and we're talking a little bit more about stress. And we started talking before the break about some of the ways that we can deal with stress. You mentioned medications, and that is good for acute bouts of stress.
Yes.
Are there some long-term medications that you would take if stress is just something that is so chronic?
Yeah, it's possible to do that. It kind of depends on what the level is. For instance, a lot of people have performance anxiety, musicians, dancers, that sort of thing. And some of the high blood pressure medicines, specifically the beta blockers, are used to help calm that down. And that's a safe thing to do. Sometimes antidepressants are used. As I said, the benzodiazepines usually are not good long-term. There's a medicine called Buspar that is used for long-term anxiety and stress, and that's less addicting than the benzodiazepines. And the benzodiazepines are the drugs like Xanax and Ativan and Valium. And they're pretty sedating and have a lot of potential for addiction and abuse. But Buspar is one that can be used long-term to help with anxiety.
Okay, so let's talk about other ways. What are some other ways we can deal with stress other than medication?
Well, one of the best is exercise. especially aerobic exercise. And I usually recommend to people that they start walking. Get out of the house and go for a 20 to 30-minute walk. That's been found to be, in scientific studies, that's been found to be equal to medication if people will just do it. But there are other things. Medication meditation. Got medication on the brain. Meditation is useful for some people. Music therapy, art therapy, things like yoga can be helpful.
So let's, how does stress affect the immune system? I've heard about how stress can really affect your immune system. How does that work?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. In the short term, a stressor can actually improve our immune response. And if you think about like an illness, you get a viral illness, actually your immune system goes to work right away in response to that stress. And it's the same sort of hormonal release that we talked about before that boosts the immune system, at least in the short term. In the long term, for chronic stress, chronic anxiety, it actually tends to weaken our immune system. And you can see illnesses develop that you might not have gotten. Your body would have been able to fend off if you hadn't been stressed.
Yeah. Now, here's kind of a crazy question, but can somebody die from stress? Can it affect your heart and your immune system to the point that you...
especially if you've been under long-term stress, because that can raise your blood pressure. And if you have long-term high blood pressure, you can get into bad problems like heart disease, kidney disease. And there are certainly people who, in fits of anger or depression, they suffer a heart attack, and it's directly linked to that stressor. So, yeah, that actually can happen.
So it can be pretty darn serious.
It can.
Let's talk a little bit about how stress affects maybe your appetite, decreased appetite, weight loss, and maybe it also goes the other way where you've got some weight gain.
Yeah, I think probably we have more instances of it going the other way. Eating releases endorphins, especially eating foods that are not all that nutritious. Foods that are high in sugar and fat content release endorphins. Endorphins are the hormones that give us a sense of pleasure and reward. And so that's a sort of an unhealthy response to stress that many people fall into.
That's why you go for that pint of ice cream after you've had a bad day at work.
And you eat the whole thing.
And you eat the whole thing in one sitting.
Exactly. You feel good.
For a minute.
It's not necessarily the best thing for you to do, but you feel good for a little while. Yeah.
All right, speaking of ice cream, are there some foods that can help reduce stress and some that maybe are going to increase your stress?
Yeah, we're straying a little bit from a lot of scientific evidence, but there is some that shows that people relax more when they're eating chocolate. So there you go.
So that's a point for chocolate.
Yeah, point for chocolate. Citrus fruits fall into that category. Avocado is reputed to be good for stress. Berries and nuts. And that's about it.
and that's it.
The bad foods are the ones that are high in sugars, high in fats, processed foods. Those are ones that tend to increase stress and increase inflammation. So they're just generally not that healthy for you.
If I put berries on my ice cream, does it counteract that? Now it's neutral?
Yeah, I think then it zeroes right out. So
Perfect.
You can double what you would have had otherwise.
All right, what about men and women? Do they experience stress differently? Does their body react to stress differently?
I think the bodies tend to react about the same. I think there's a lot of cultural learning, though, that men are taught to not show stress. Women, particularly when they are talking among themselves, I think are a lot better at verbalizing the stress that they're under. Men are sort of taught to just be silent and stiff upper lip and all that.
Just take it.
Yeah.
You'll get through it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, that's really helpful. Stay with us, and when we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about different ways we can manage our stress.
Okay.
Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. Dr. Kunzweiler is still with us, and we're going to talk a little bit about how we can manage our stress. So we started on that a little bit, talked about some medication, and one thing that was interesting, you mentioned exercise, and that cardiovascular exercise is particularly good. Why is that?
It uses the heart in a healthier way. You get your heart rate up, and actually your blood pressure will drop a little bit when you're doing that. And so those are healthy responses. And as I said, I usually recommend walking to people because it's so simple and most people enjoy that. But almost anything that gets your heart rate up helps you feel better, and we know lowers your stress level and improves your cardiovascular system. So things like bicycling, swimming, even things that people don't necessarily think about, like gardening, dancing, all those things are aerobic and are healthy for you and help to manage stress.
And then I hear a lot about the connection between being out in nature and how that can calm you down. And so what is it about being in nature that helps with stress reduction versus walking on a city street?
Yeah, it just is a different environment, and when you're in the city, you are confronted by all the sorts of things that are frustrating you in life anyway. You've got traffic, you've got people, you've got rudeness, and you just don't have that if you get out into the woods and are walking around. You don't have those same distractions, it seems like. And most people, when they're in a more natural environment, tend to relax, and you just start focusing on different things. You forget about your problems, and you focus on the beauty of nature.
That's good. I like to try and go for a walk, and then there's another part of me that when I'm really stressed, I like to just go to sleep. And I know that excessive sleeping can be tied to depression potentially, but is it okay to just kind of escape and sleep your way through some stress? Is that okay?
Probably occasionally. I don't think it's a great long-term strategy. For one thing, if you're taking naps, it tends to interfere with your nighttime sleep. And for our brains to restore themselves, you really need 7-8 hours of uninterrupted sleep at night. So a nap occasionally is okay. I'd put the walking shoes on and go outside and walk instead of napping, I think.
Fair enough. But you did mention needing that good long sleep at night. And a lot of times stress will cause insomnia in people. What are some ways that we can help make sure we get a good night's sleep? Yeah,
there's been a lot of study about improving the quality of sleep, so a lot is known about it. There are some do's and don'ts that we could talk about. One thing, you should restrict caffeine. You try not to drink any caffeine for at least 4 to 6 hours before your typical bedtime. Alcohol, some people feel like, well, I'll just drink until I pass out and then I'll sleep. That's not a good strategy either. Alcohol can render you unconscious, but it's not real natural sleep, and so that's not a good route to go. So limit the caffeine. It's good to have a routine. Try to go to bed about the same time every night. Do something relaxing before you go to bed. Take a warm bath or shower, maybe read a book, listen to some music, something relaxing like that. Then the sleep environment, it should be dark, it should be quiet, and it should be relatively cool. Most people get better sleep in a cool environment. And try to limit any distractions.
And I've heard that it's best to not be on electronics before you go to sleep. The blue light or something like that might interfere with your sleep. Yeah,
it seems like that somehow stimulates the brain and makes it harder to relax. So I agree with that.
Okay. So what about therapy? We mentioned it a little bit earlier. Are there certain types of therapy that work better for stress reduction?
Yeah, cognitive behavioral therapy, which is sort of a fancy word for basically talk therapy.
Okay.
This is the sort of thing that clinical psychologists do. Some social workers are trained in this as well. And it is a way to help you to reframe how you think about stress and to help you to reframe how you respond to stress and the sorts of problems that everybody has in their daily life. And that's been found to be very helpful for people.
You know, I mentioned that sometimes I like to just go to sleep and just ignore my stress. Another really bad habit I have is I just kind of withdraw when I'm feeling stress, and I would guess that maybe that's not the best way. Socialization might be a little bit better.
Yeah, it's interesting. The people who are happiest and the people who live the longest are the people who are the most socially connected. So they have a circle of friends, or maybe they have a church that they go to where they socialize regularly. Try not to lose contact with family members. Yeah, it does help us. We're social animals, and it does help us to relieve our stress, and we live longer and we live happier.
And does it matter if it's face-to-face socialization or long distance? I mean, with the pandemic, a lot of us have had to go to remote socialization.
Yeah, I don't know how much we really know about that. The pandemic was such an unusual circumstance, but I think the general feeling is that there's a difference between face-to-face meeting and a Zoom meeting. And it's much better to be face-to-face. You miss a lot of nuance, you miss a lot of body language, and especially electronic communication, texting, you lose all of the nuance, and sometimes people, they can't tell if you're joking or not when you are texting, and it's much better to meet face-to-face. So you should try to keep those interpersonal interactions going. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much. That's a lot of good information. Any last words before we wrap up today?
This was a Coolio experience.
Thank you very much.
I'm
That's
hoping
great.
to de-stress.
I just want you to know that I dared him to say Coolio. Thank you for watching. I hope you join us again next week. Until then, stay fit, stay well, and stay healthy for life with Healthy Living for Life. Thanks for joining us.
Healthy Living for Life is brought to you by Mountain Pacific Quality Health in partnership with AARP Montana. We'd love to hear from you. If you have suggestions for future programs, visit our website at mpqhf.org or call us at 406-443-4020. You can also catch us on YouTube by visiting our website and clicking on the Healthy Living for Life logo. Production facilities provided by Video Express Productions.